We love him, and we're so fortunate to have him every Thursday. He's a former federal prosecutor, now in the Los Angeles area. If you get into trouble, he'll help you out. He's a defense attorney, but maybe he won't help you out. I don't know. It is David Katz, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, David. Hi.
Great to be with you.
Hello, nice to meet you. I'm JL.
Hi. Pleasure.
JL, David JL. Yeah.
Hi,
so JL has a legal background as well. So I've got two lawyers here with me now, which is great because there's a lot of legal stuff to talk about. We were just kind of going over.
Kim, they used to say that two lawyers could do very nicely in a town that was too small to support one. You get it? They'd argue with each other.
We were just talking about habeas corpus. And so it'll be interesting to get your take on whether that can be suspended or not and what it actually means. Can you talk a little bit about the Trump administration indicating that they're going to try to do that?
Sure. Well, habeas corpus is a writ that comes all the way back centuries ago from the United Kingdom, from England, from Great Britain. And it was very important to the revolution because it's the idea, the American Revolution. It was one of the things that our forefathers fought for, died for. That you would have this right not to be held by the king or the new president of the United States. You wouldn't be allowed to be held by the executive branch and its jailers without there being a legal basis to hold you. And the way that you would say, hey, there's no legal basis to hold me, is that you would go to a court and you would file a writ of habeas corpus, a writ of, hey, you have the body, my body, and you should release me because you're violating my rights to keep me in custody. Now, it was suspended a couple of times in war. It was famously suspended by Abraham Lincoln. But, there was civil war. They were about to take the railroads in Maryland and cut off the nation's capital. And that's when Lincoln imposed suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. And then it was, I believe, suspended for a while, certainly in spirit, if not in actual effect, during World War II. And you can debate that forever. But it's certainly not in modern times. And there's just really no basis to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. If you're cynical, you would say that most of the judges nowadays deny the writ of habeas corpus and don't release very many people who file a petition for a writ of habeas corpus. But the other side would be that generally the authorities observe the law, and therefore it's kind of a Hail Mary pass, a lot of the petitions for a writ of habeas corpus. But the idea of suspending the writ of habeas corpus and just taking, let's say, people who are deemed illegally in the United States, just scooping them up wholesale without any due process, without any hearing, and saying on top of that, we're going to deport you and you can't have a lawyer run to court for you and file a writ of habeas corpus is so beyond the pale that it's not about to happen. I think it's just something that Steve Miller threw out there so that people would talk about it. And then anything less than that, they would say, oh, wow, they're not that bad. At least they're not totally suspending the writ of habeas corpus.
Do they have to, if they do that, do they have to go to court to make it be okay? Or is it just an executive order, like it's suspended and that's it?
Well, that's a very interesting thing. One of the things that they would probably try to deport you too fast for you to have time to get a writ of habeas corpus. So I guess their position would be you're detained, you're stuck in one of these hellhole immigration prisons. They don't give you a pen, they don't give you paper. If they do, you write out a little writ of habeas corpus, you try to throw it in the mail, you try to hire a lawyer, and before anything can really happen, before any paper actually gets submitted to any court, presto, you're out of the country. So I think that's what Steve Miller had in mind. And then, of course, you could have lesser things than that. All of the petitions for writ of habeas corpus could be denied en masse if it really did take effect that the president could suspend it. The judge would then rule, well, under the Constitution, under the law, there is a basis to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. But I don't think that they're serious that it would ever get that far. I don't see judges. You could take the Trumpiest chosen judges in America, and I don't think they would say that a president has the right to suspend the writ of habeas corpus. It's kind of like giving due process to the supposed violent gang members. If you give them due process, and that process that is due is less than a trial, but there is some process that is due, and if you give them that process and 98% of them are provably gang members, guess what? 98% will be expeditiously deported under the law, under due process. And if it's not 98%, if it's only 50%, that means that half of them are being deported right now who shouldn't be. that it would be a violation of the law. So this whole thing, well, you could say it's kind of fraught. It's really overreaching. It's really extreme. It's not something we've seen from, even a Republican president before. It's something that was done, yes, by Lincoln, who I revere, during the Civil War. But did I mention we were in the midst of a civil war? They were about to take the nation's capital.
Yeah. Something else that appears to be against the Constitution, the questioning of birthright citizenship in the Constitution, and Trump trying to say, no, just because you were born here doesn't mean you're a citizen. Something that seems to be in the Constitution, that seems to have been the way we've operated for hundreds of years, and now in question, and arguments are before the Supreme Court. And there was a story earlier that the Supreme Court seemed to be leaning Trump's way on this, and then JL had some different information on that.
Yeah, well, sorry. Yeah, I just saw that in the Times seemed to suggest that they were not leaning his way in terms of getting rid of birthright citizenship. But I guess in the part of the case that involves how a federal judge can kind of restrain the executive, they seem to be maybe leaning his way on that part of it.
Well, Mark and I talked about this, and the birthright citizenship is very clear in the Constitution. This is the Constitution that was amended after the Civil War. The kooky, wacky argument that's been made in academia but never been given much traction, now it's in the U.S. Supreme Court, is that somehow this language in there about under the jurisdiction of the United States has some meaning that the wacky, kooky side gives to it. It doesn't have that meaning. Mark and I talked about this, that the meaning that it has is that, and think about the situation in the world in 1870, 1868, the French and the English were very mighty. They stayed out of the Civil War. Everyone was worried about what influence they and their diplomats might have. If you didn't say within the jurisdiction of the United States, somebody who was born in the United States, son or daughter of a French or English diplomat, could rise not only to great power, they could rise to be the president of the United States if you gave them birthright citizenship. And it seems awfully old-fashioned, but that's what they were really trying to deal with in 1868, that none of those diplomats who were not under the jurisdiction of the United States, they were under the jurisdiction of their home countries. Now, the argument, the kooky, wacky argument goes, well, the people who are born in this country who are they're transient or their parents are here illegally, that those people are under the jurisdiction of some foreign power. They're citizens of Mexico. They're citizens of Haiti. And the reason that is a kooky, wacky argument is because the Supreme Court has dealt with this issue before at the end of the 19th century. And I think it was 1898, they had a Supreme Court case of a person who was of Chinese extraction. They were born in the United States. Their parents were not legally here. As I read the record, this person's parents were not legally here. And yet this person, when they tried to re-enter the United States and was denied because the person was not a citizen of the United States allowed to enter the United States, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, this person with the Chinese parents, this person whose parents were only here transiently, that person, just by dint of being born in the United States, was a U.S. citizen. So it's not only, I think, clear in the language of the Constitution, but it's also clear from this U.S. Supreme Court precedent. I know some people are going to be cynics and say, well, they reversed Roe v. Wade. Why won't they reverse this precedent? But Roe v. Wade was the reversal was a bit of a one-off. And so I don't think that this case is going to be decided that there is no birthright citizenship. I think that's really beyond the pale. Absolutely. So the question in this case is supposed to be about the injunctions. Can they issue a nationwide injunction? And of course, if you want to see a bunch of hypocrites, look at the Republicans who are pushing this, because when it was the abortion medication that 60% of American women used to have an abortion, 60%, they had a nationwide injunction issued by a judge in Amarillo, Texas, who said, no, you cannot get that pill anywhere in America because the FDA supposedly didn't do the tests on it properly. And I don't see all of those Republicans. I don't know, maybe you guys remember that all those Republicans were screaming about nationwide injunctions, or when they issued some of the other nationwide injunctions that had a Republican right-wing flavor, that the Republicans were screaming. But now all of a sudden they've decided these nationwide injunctions, because their man is president, they don't want any of these. And the questioning today was a very good question, which was, what are you supposed to do about this if you don't issue a nationwide injunction? What are you supposed to do? You're going to say, okay, well, my case only involves the San Francisco Bay Area. So there's birthright citizenship, but only in the San Francisco Bay Area, because I'm not going to issue a nationwide injunction. And then what people are going to, there's going to be a different result in Southern California. There's going to be a different result in Amarillo, Texas. And if you don't like the nationwide injunction and you're the loser, you can go to the appellate court and say dissolve the nationwide injunction, or you can go to the U.S. Supreme Court and say dissolve the nationwide injunction. And that's exactly what they did do in the Mephistophone case. And the nationwide injunction issued by that judge in Amarillo, Texas, was dissolved. So they really are like they're trying to find a problem that doesn't exist. There are enough problems in the world. So I think the way that this comes out is they say in particular cases, yes, if it's equitable and there's no other way to solve the problem that appears, yes, a judge can issue a nationwide injunction. And yes, the courts of appeal will expeditiously hear them and overturn them if there shouldn't be a nationwide injunction, if it should be no injunction or only an area-wide injunction. And as to birthright citizenship, they'll either totally punt on it or they'll say, read your Constitution. Remember that guy at the guy who carried around his little Constitution all the time?
Don't laugh at me, but I have a pocket Constitution I keep right on my desk.
Look, right there, it says born in the United States, citizen.
If I may ask a question, just in terms of, it seems like a decision that should be 9-0 if they don't punt on birthright citizenship. But do you think there's a chance that, the faux originalists, Thomas and Alito, could come up with a sort of, well, actually, because they keep trying to say it was really just applicable in their not them, but like the Trump administration, that it really only applied to black, ex-slaves and black people in America at the time. Is there any way that Alito and Thomas, because I feel like this is the kind of decision that should be just a 9-0, like just there it is, settled, done, no wiggle room, 0. But is there a chance this comes out to like a 7-2 where they're arguing that, like, you know what, birthright citizenship, we should re-examine it, because Alito would probably say a wrong decision, like he did with it doesn't matter how old a wrong decision is or how many generations have relied on it. Wrong is wrong. Me and Thomas say, screw birthright citizenship.
Right. Well, they go back and they say, should we have separate but equal for hundreds of years in this country? Thank God we had Brown v. Board of Education. And so we got rid of separate but equal. Sometimes it's the better part of valor and wisdom to overturn an old precedent. But you always get suspicious that they always seem to overturn these old precedents that are favorites of the Federalist Society to be overturned.
Right.
And you wonder how fair is really that analysis. But I think, there used to be a road show at the law schools and in the academia, which was this Professor Eastman, who's had his own share of troubles since then. And this Professor Eastman, he's the one who said that Trump could do some of the crazy things that he did to hold on to power. And in fact, he was, I believe, as things stand right now, either suspended or about to be disbarred by the California bar for the opinions that he gave to Trump. But that's a whole other thing. This Professor Eastman, and maybe he'll win his appeal, God only knows. But right now, he's really behind the 8 ball, this Professor Eastman. But he used to have a road show with another person named John Yoo. John Yoo, among his other distinctions, is a law professor at my old school, the University of California at Berkeley. It's kind of shocking.
He's the torture memo, right? He's the
kind of shocking when they put the chyron that says author of torture memo, and then the next chyron professor, University of California, Berkeley. It's like, oh, wow. But anyway, they used to have this road show. And you would go. I've actually debated you on Laura Ingram's show, but I digress. That was the you Katz show. This would be the you Eastman show, where you would say any person, any right-thinking person can look at this clear language in the Constitution and say birthright citizenship should be 9-0. And Eastman would give the counter argument, which I always think is weak, but the argument that might get 2 votes, Alito and Thomas might get their votes. Oh, by the way, this Eastman was a law clerk to Justice Thomas. So was Laura Ingraham on Fox, a law clerk to Justice Thomas. And so was the lawyer who famously argued that Trump could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and not even be prosecuted or arrested. So there would be some of the law clerks of yesteryear of Justice Clarence Thomas. But the argument goes that what they were trying to remedy was the Dred Scott decision in the 1868 amendment to the Constitution that said that blacks could never be citizens, could never participate in civic life in America. And so the goal of that Congress was to give that participation and that citizenship to former slaves. And they were not focused on this problem of people whose parents were totally illegally in the United States. And would that, as Trump says, you touch the sand of America and you suddenly become a citizen? That's Trump's argument boiled down to the way Trump expresses himself. And so the argument goes that they really were not contemplating that situation in 1868, and that the U.S. Supreme Court decision that follows on at the end of the 19th century, whatever you want to say about the Chinese person born here, his parents were not transients or they weren't here illegally. And you got to go back and see, were they transients, were they here illegally? And then the argument goes, no, they weren't here illegally. So you don't really have a precedent on people. And you know what offends people? You know what the poster child is for this anchor baby argument, that the people come here just to have the baby. You know, there's a birth tourism just to have the baby here, or people who have just come across the border. And their dramatization of it. I don't want to have my baby on the Rio Grande, swim the Rio Grande, have the baby on this side, and it changes everything. Canada has the same thing. We're not the only country that has birthright citizenship. Canada has birthright citizenship too, and we are nations of immigrants. It kind of makes sense that Canada and the United States historically have had birthright citizenship.
There is a new law being considered in the state of Georgia, and the headline is outrageous. But I kind of understand the law. So the law would allow criminal defendants to recover legal costs if the prosecutor in the case is disqualified. It also expands compensation for people who were wrongly convicted. But the headline reads, Trump could recoup legal fees in this Georgia election case that was underway with the Fani Willis under this new bill. And it seems so outrageous that he could get his legal fees back. I don't know. It doesn't sit with me well, even though I understand the purpose of the law is not necessarily Trump and getting him his money back, but I don't know.
I think the headline is exactly what you fear. I think that the intent of that bill was exactly to line Trump's pocket, and they think this is all great fun. These Republicans who
they threw in the second part to kind of get liberals going like, well, we do like that. We do like giving more money to wrongly convicted people. So maybe they'll just go with it. They'll go with the Trump law if we give them something.
No, that's such a great point. And you get really tired of getting played by the Republicans, you know.
It's clearly a cynical move. It's all of a sudden they found Jesus and want to give wrongly convicted people more money.
There's nothing that beats the hearts of the Republicans in the House and in the Assembly and the Senate of Georgia than making sure that poor people, minority people done wrong by the criminal justice system get their wrongs righted and compensated. No, this is the Put More Money in Trump's Pocket Act. This is why both houses there in the Republican legislature voted for this. This is why it's popular. It's also a knock, as you say, on Fani Willis, because how many people will this apply to? Right? What did they? It's set up for that whole thing. You know what I mean? Just to give compensation in that case. And you got to remember something about Georgia. Mark and I did this. We talked about Fani Willis, and our comments were controversial at the time because she was riding high, and here he was getting taken to the jail like any common criminal. And Trump managed to play the thing to his advantage. He arrived in a huge plane with a big Secret Service detail. He came in with a motorcade. He had the T-shirt that he ended up marketing. He actually turned even his mugshot down there to his advantage. It turned out to be kind of a hellhole prison down there in Atlanta, that with all of their decades of Democratic rule, the Democrats hadn't done anything to make a more livable place for poor and minority people, right, who ended up in that jail. So a lot of strange things happened with that case. And I always thought, if I can digress for just a minute, that Georgia case was one of the real impetuses for the U.S. Supreme Court decision giving presidential immunity, because it could have come out a lot of different ways, and I think it would have protected presidents. Because it does take, and I know we have Bondi now and we have Kash Patel, so people will laugh at this remark, but there were some safeguards to a runaway federal prosecution against a president or former president. But there did not seem to be many against a runaway state prosecution of a president. And the only way that you could stop runaway state prosecutions of a former president was to have something like that monstrosity with presidential immunity, because otherwise you really could have all 50 states bring cases like the one down in Georgia, the one in New York City. Remember about the Stormy Daniel, Michael Cohen case? People remember it for that. How do you stop the states from bringing those unless, I think 6 justices on the Supreme Court said, unless you have something like that monstrosity of presidential immunity? Having said that, remember the Atlanta case was the one with the phone call. The best thing about that whole case, and I also talked to Mark about this, the reason they kept dragging their feet with this racketeering and taking so long, and they loved racketeering and they wanted to bring 20-some people in there and something, bring Trump in there quickly for the phone call in Atlanta. That they did not do, but that's the phone call that he makes into Georgia that Raffensperger has the good wit to record. Trump doesn't know it's going to be recorded. And that's the one that Trump says out of his own mouth, okay, find me 11,500 votes. And it's obvious that what he means, Kim and JL, is go concoct 11,500 votes that don't exist to just.
I just need 11,780 votes. That's all I need. Just bring it to me.
You've reported it so many times, you know the exact tally.
Exactly.
So I went a little
this
far.
Is going to be horrible for you. This is going to be horrible for you, Brad. This is going to be very bad for you.
And your lawyer. You know, Mr. Lawyer, you could be in trouble, he says to the counsel for Raffensperger. So anyway, this law down there, yes, it sounds like what they're going to do is they're going to give Trump some money for his legal fees.
Millions.
There's a lawyer down there.
Legal fees, millions. Yeah.
Trump paid $1.5 million to one of his lawyers down there, which JL, you as a member of the guild, you know, on one level, $1.5 million fee. He made that less than a year representing one person. There's a certain just sort of like, wow, lawyer got a $1.5 million fee for representing Trump, and now Trump is maybe going to get reimbursed for it. But that whole case, that, like I said, she had that apparent conflict of interest. She had that special counsel. We called him the $700,000 man. You know, they had me on all these stations like Fox and these other right-wing stations, because as long as they could talk about the $700,000 man and show pictures of him and Fani Willis, they didn't care much what I said. They liked the graphic and that story so much about him getting the $700,000. And he wasn't really the boyfriend, but he went over there at 1 o'clock in the morning to discuss the case with her at her house, right?
Yeah. Well, it turns out you're right, because that legislation was sponsored by State Senator Brandon Beach, who is a Republican Trump ally recently appointed by the president to serve as the next U.S. Treasurer. So there
you're kidding. He's gone on to better things in the Trump administration. You're pulling my leg, Kim. You're pulling my leg.
You know how they do.
Wow.
Speaking of these older cases that it seemed like for a while Trump was finally getting his just due, the Mar-a-Lago special prosecutor is taking the fifth at this House committee that is being called by some weaponized. Brat is his name, and he's asserting his constitutional right not to incriminate himself at this panel, now investigating the people involved in Trump prosecutions. So, you know, now they're going after the people who were going after Trump. It's the part of the retribution tour.
This is Jim Jordan's committee. They're in the majority in the House. This is an absolute gotcha thing. This Brat, I think it is a distinguished lawyer. He was the head of, I think, these national security prosecutions. And of course, it was totally righteous to pursue Trump. You know, here he's got these documents in the bathroom, in the ballroom, scattered all over Mar-a-Lago. There's spies, you know, running around the place, because this is a whole lot easier than usual espionage. He's being so careless with them, Trump, and he has so many of them around. And then there's the allegations that he put his lawyer up to lie, and some federal judge found that the attorney-client privilege didn't hold in this case because this was a waiver under what's called the crime fraud exception. The judge was satisfied that Trump was committing a crime or fraud through this lawyer. So the judge forced the lawyer to testify that he'd been misled basically about where the documents were there at Mar-a-Lago. And then they said to him, look, just give the documents back. And they had this document that someone else signed, and then she was in trouble because they said the documents weren't there. They'd done a search. Then it turned out when the FBI went in there, lo and behold, all the documents that weren't supposed to be there were there. They'd been moved from one room to another. Why don't we have a big pool problem and have them all drown? Why don't we drown all the documents? It looked like Trump had told somebody. And this Brat ended up investigating all this. But with all of that, that's not what Jim Jordan and the House committee were going to bring out. They were going to try to find something that they could use to incriminate this Jay Brat, distinguished lawyer or not. So I think he took very good advice to assert his rights under the Fifth Amendment. And, you know, as a criminal defense attorney now, I'm always surprised that people don't assert their rights under the Fifth Amendment. There's still this idea that, well, it makes you look bad. But when you're in a situation like Brat was in, I think he was very wise. And I think that, you know, they've already announced, Trump announced during his campaign over and over again, this Bondi, who's now the attorney general and has the power to make these decisions, said, we're going to go after the prosecutors, the bad ones. We're going to investigate the investigators. And I thought at the time, I told this to Mark, we put this on the show, we said this on the show, that I thought Biden should have given more pardons, not less. I think he should have pardoned these people like Brat. He should have pardoned. So there was just, you know, he would have had immunity. And the idea is that, okay, you're not setting a bad precedent. Any presidential candidate who runs in the future and says, if I get into office, I will nail this person, I will nail that person, and says the specific names of the people he's going to nail. He made it clear, Trump, he didn't say, you know, he doesn't imply, he says the things right out loud. He said, I'm going to go after that New York City prosecutor.
He had a list.
After that Atlanta prosecutor.
Yeah.
Biden should have given all of those people immunity. He gave some of them, who did he give? Fauci. He gave
January 6th committee.
Yeah, the January 6th committee. He gave a Milley. That would have been an outrage if they had ever tried to go after Milley. You know, he was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Biden gave it to his own family members, but Biden didn't give it as widely as he should have. And now those people, I think, are going to have to take the fifth. And if some people think it looks bad, it's the only prudent thing to do.
Well, it's like Chris Rock once said about Kobe Bryant hiring Johnny Cochran. He said, but he'll look guilty. Yeah, he'll look guilty in the mall.
Exactly. Right. Instead of looking guilty because his name has been reduced to a registration number at some federal prison. You know, the reality of our system, and I've been a federal prosecutor, and, you know, I loved it. I respect the federal prosecutors. I deal with them now. I'm a working lawyer defending people in federal criminal cases. But unfortunately, we were supposed to have a government that was of law and not of men, which men or women. But we're supposed to have a government of laws and not of the individual man or woman who has the legal mantle. But that's not what we really ended up with. We ended up with the safeguards in our system being because they have really ethical prosecutors and hopefully agents who want to do the right thing. But if they don't want to do the right thing, there are very few safeguards. And I see these things all the time. I used to say on MSNBC, well, this person was indicted by a grand jury, they would say, with a straight look on their face. Even people who are lawyers like you and me, JL, this person was indicted by a grand jury. A grand jury will indict a ham sandwich because there's no safeguards or guardrails to make sure that the grand jury operates properly. Now, you could say if it's the most outrageous thing in the whole world, maybe the grand jury won't indict. Even they'll say, well, wait a second, that sounds weird. We haven't had a case like that. Is that really against the law? But, you know, there's a presentation by the prosecution where they have all of the, they have the floor, and no one else can, you can't have a criminal defense attorney in there. You can testify yourself in front of the grand jury if you're the target, a huge mistake, because you can't be there with your lawyer. The best you could do is run out after each question. I don't know if Woody Allen did this in one of his movies, but it's worth that kind of comic treatment where you get the question, you have the question in your mind, you run outside and you ask your lawyer and you run back in, you run outside, you run back in, you run outside. And what is the grand jury going to think of your state of innocence or guilt after that's the entire colloquy? So I've had that. I've had that where I'm waiting outside the grand jury room and I say to my client, look, this was your idea. This is your decision. It's against my advice, but come out and ask me any question that stumps you. And the next thing you know, you sit there for 20 minutes. Guy comes out and says, hard question. He said, no, they're done with me.
Wow.
It's just a system. It's a system that's all the government's way.
But I have a general question that isn't as much. It's about the law, but what and this is of course from that great wealth of knowledge, Facebook. But I saw on some page that was like a pro-Trump page, and it's not surprising, but I think it speaks to where we might be as a civics ignorant country now. It said, the person wrote, I see all the left-wing people are now concerned about due process, but where was due process for the January 6th people? Now, of course, that's ridiculous. They got grand jury, trial, appeals, and pardons. They literally got the whole host. They got the platinum plan of due process.
Right.
But I think the problem, for me, with the where the country is now and what Trump has, I think, successfully exploited, because I think he projects correctly, maybe unintentionally, but correctly, his own ignorance of the law of the Constitution onto Americans. And I think he's probably been correct in doing that, because you can't really, it seems it's harder and harder now to convince people of things like due process when they don't really understand it. When somebody can say, where was the due process for the January 6th people? That's somebody who doesn't understand anything. And, you see a post like that with, 20,000 likes, and you're like, oh my God, this isn't even getting into the minutia of the Constitution or the law. We seem to lack a basic understanding as a nation now. And I think Trump has been able to, he has the bad character and the ignorance to exploit that. And it seems to me, because I see so many of these issues we've been talking about really don't register with people. And that's why I think sometimes you have somebody like Gavin Newsom, I think incorrectly but understandably, going, hey, due process is a distraction. Let's talk about tariffs. And I go, due process can't be a distraction.
No.
Then we should fold it up. We should fold up the country and go, time to start somewhere new. And yet I don't know that he's wrong in practice. I think he's wrong morally. I think I would not stand for that. But I think how much of this country sort of goes, yeah, I don't even know what due process is, but what are we going to do? I don't know what your thoughts on that are, and just generally speaking, because we're talking law and like Constitution and all very important, but it seems like people have become so ignorant that they can be, easily exploited.
Yeah.
Well, the grand jury is kind of my hobby horse and a lot of criminal defense attorneys, because it was supposed to be the great bulwark against, arbitrary action, that before you would be indicted, you would really have this protection of your peers taking a hard look at the case. But the fact that, I don't like how the grand jury operates, because it's too much of a rubber stamp for the government, doesn't mean that we don't have great due process on other things. Like you take the January 6th people, it's not a great showing that they were all guilty, that they were indicted by a grand jury. But it is a great showing that they were all guilty, that they could go to a jury trial in America, which is one of our great, it's one of the great things that we have. And, the jury has to find you unanimously guilty, all 12, beyond a reasonable doubt. You have a judge who has life tenure in federal court, who's making, who's making the decisions. It's not the executive branch or something. It's a life tenured judge who knows the law, who's deciding whether evidence should come in or whether fairness is. So the idea that the January 6th people didn't have due process is just awful. It's just a myth. And I think most people didn't buy it. Even when Trump came in, people like Vice President Vance said, oh, well, we're not going to pardon anyone who committed violence. And other people said, we're not going to pardon anybody who attacked police officers. And of course, Trump pardoned them right up to the worst of the worst. People with double-digit sentences, he gave pardons to. 5 people died there, heart attacks, all sorts of things. So many people were injured. These are our brave warriors, our guardians of this, sacred place. I mean, that's the Capitol is a sacred place for our rule of law and our system. They invaded the place, they marauded in the place, and they were very close to getting some of those legislators for all the wrong purposes to harm them. They had that, they were going to hang Mike Pence. Mike Pence's life was in danger. It's still a great story how he didn't leave. I think they were going to have the most senior Republican take over if he did and send the vote back to the states. Pence hung in there. He refused to leave. He refused to be driven away. He came back and did his duty. McConnell, say what you want about him, came back and did his duty. A few hours later, they certified the vote. And so these people and they had no idea that they were doing something nonviolent. If they were doing something nonviolent, remember they had to break through the lines. They had to fight with the guards. They had to overpower them. So many people brought spray and brought everything else. So January 6th is just, he's managed to spin that his own way. And all I can say, JL and Kim, is that I think the country is so polarized. And it's a pity that the country is so polarized. And I think, after Trump, it's going to be more polarized. There'll be a big swing back against the excesses of Trump, which have been so manifold. And then there'll be excesses by the group that comes in afterwards. And I wish things would stay more in the center. And I'll defend centrism and moderation anywhere, because I think it's great for the country to not be out on the polarized left or right, but to be more in the center and the common sense of the people.
I know we only have you for a couple more minutes, but I saw this story and wanted to run it past you. That apparently what we hear from the Trump administration about Mr. Abrego Garcia, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who is this man who was taken to this supermax horrible prison in El Salvador without due process, and that the courts have said we need to show that we're trying to facilitate his return to America so that he can get due process before he may or may not be deported. That what the Trump administration says publicly about this case is not the same as what's being said in the courtroom. It seems that the Trump administration told the court overseeing the Garcia case in private filings that it indeed is working to secure his release from custody at this El Salvadorian prison. And that goes completely against what is being said in the Oval Office, where Trump is like, we don't want this guy back. And Kristi Noem's like, we're not trying to bring him back. He's gone and he's never coming back. So it's interesting that there's this dual thing happening, one behind the scenes and one public, and what they want us to know.
Well, I put my winning streak as Katz on the line a few weeks ago, saying that I thought Garcia Abrego would come back. Once Abrego Garcia is back, he may very well be deported under due process, and whether he should be deported or not by a judge who looks at this case. And again, he doesn't get a whole trial, but he gets the process that's due in this situation. And once he has that, then it's like, that's the rule of law. So I'm not taking a horse in that race, but I did think that after the U.S. Supreme Court said 9-0, that the president and the administration have to facilitate his return, that it would be facilitated in some way. He was moved from that hellhole where all of the other prisoners are being held to someplace, because I think it would have been terrible publicity for the United States and for Trump if he'd been killed or attacked. Remember, the reason he wasn't supposed to be deported anywhere without a hearing, a follow-up hearing, was that a judge had ruled that his life was in danger in El Salvador. So where did Trump and Homan send him? They sent him to the place where his life would most be in danger. So they got him out of there. So I think nothing awful is going to happen to him. That's my prediction. And I think that they will bring him back. People say Trump loves this fight. The only reason Trump loves this fight is because he can call him a wife beater. The only reason that he loves the fight with the Wisconsin judge is because he likes that image of her helping him and his lawyer get out the back door of the courthouse. These are not based on principle with Trump. It's based on, WWF. Does he like to be in the ring against that person? And yeah, he likes to be in the ring against the guy he can call the wife beater, and he likes being in the ring with that judge in Wisconsin who slipped somebody out the back door. She's saying that's her judicial immunity. He's saying, no, what you do on the bench, but when you run out in the hallway and you yell at the ICE officers, which is the allegation, and then when you you send them in the wrong direction, you send them that away, and you send the prisoner and his lawyer this away through court space that they're not supposed to be in. He likes that fight. I'm all on her side, and they should never hook up and perp walk a judge. That was awful. They ought to pass a law so that cannot happen. But he likes he likes the fight. He likes the wrestling match aspect of her as his adversary and of Garcia Abrego as his adversary. And it does look like he had a domestic violence case. He also had a judge order that he not be sent, and they violated that judge's order. And that's the rule of law piece that has to be remedied.
I do like the idea of Trump just being like, it tells you a lot about his base that they have to outwardly say, we're not listening to the Supreme Court while trying to secretly listen to the Supreme Court. It tells you everything you need to know about the MAGA movement, that they want to see him flouting the rule of law. Even if he's actually secretly trying to obey the law, he knows that they like it. Like you said, WWF, the heel character is secretly the most loved because you love booing him. You love seeing him be the anti-hero. And that's one of the things I've been thinking about recently is like, has watching Tony Soprano and Walter White conditioned America to see like a white criminal in the main role, as even though he's a bad guy, we're rooting for the bad guy. Is Donald Trump the ultimate anti-hero to his own supporters? But it's very telling to me that it's like, I could understand if it was the reverse. If he was the normal thing for a politician to do is lie and say, we're obeying the law and secretly not obey the law. In Trump's case, it's we're secretly trying to obey the law. Fuck the law. Who needs the law? Am I right? And that tells you a lot about his base, that's what he feels they want is an outlaw as the president.
He even said he could pick up the phone. In an interview with ABC in the Oval Office, I could pick up the phone and have Abrego Garcia back if I wanted to, but I don't. Right. I'm sure the lawyers were like, oh my God, don't say that.
Once he said, but I don't want to. Once I said I could do it, but I don't want to. This case had to be ameliorated in some way because that just cannot stand in front of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court would look completely weak. They don't want to look weak and ineffective, and Roberts wants to support the institution. It's a little bit like the Republican Senate, which has been, so craven and cowardly. But over this $500 million plane, it's just at the point where, and you have a lot of them who made those statements when they say President Clinton was selling a night in the Lincoln bedroom. That was an outrage. That was terrible, jail. That was the worst thing that ever happened in public corruption. And now you have a $500 million plane. And of course, you can see Trump's mind working. How do I get that plane after I'm president? It goes to the library, but I'm allowed to use it. I'm going to be on my palace in the air. And you might think, well, how long does he plan to live? But it's like, remember The Godfather 2? It's like Meyer Lansky. Trump plans to live forever, just like Meyer Lansky in that famous line in The Godfather 2. Can I ask you one question before we go off the air? Mark tells me you went to Georgetown, which is such an impressive law school.
Well, I'll answer your question. Graduated
lawyer.
Top 100% in my class, by the way. Yes, thank you. I still, I'm still have my, in good standing, my law degree in bar.
Pay your dues every year. Pay your dues.
I do every 2 years. Every 2 years here. But yeah, I started doing stand up in law school. I just needed a hobby, and I've just sort of been on parallel paths with them. I've had success and tons of failure in both fields.
Stand up's really hard. I mean, it's been a great loss to comedy that I pursued the U.S. Attorney Avenue and criminal defense. A great loss to comedy, but I admire what you guys do and hang in there. And
thanks.
If you ever want to get back into law, we always need a few good lawyers.
Do you need any bad ones?
No, we need more good lawyers.
Oh, no, then I can't help you there.
There are some bad ones. Yes, there are some bad ones, and we always need more good ones. So come back to the Guild if you ever want to.
Oh, well, thank you.
Question from Luis. He says, gentlemen, please reassure me that Janine Piro isn't going to parlay her part-time gig into a permanent appointment. If so, I might start drinking. Janine Piro was recently sworn in to be the prosecutor in DC, the top prosecutor. Is that right?
You don't have question of whether she can be an because he already had an acting the guy who they rejected was an acting prosecutor, and he's appointed her as like another acting prosecutor. But if that's allowed, then he could obviously skirt so many rules by just a never-ending stream of acting prosecutors, right?
Yeah, so that might be a problem, but other than that, and people always say I'm a name dropper, but I can't help it that I've met all these people. If you've been on Fox and these other stations, you've met Judge Jean, and she was just fine. The one time that I was on the show with her, she was just fine. I was going to be on with Laura Ingram's show, which came on just before the 5 that she's on. So she was there getting ready for her show in New York City, the one that's catty corner from Radio City. And she was just fine. She did use a couple of swear words, but not on the air. But it's always funny when you meet somebody. I'm not one of those people. It's not like I'm so refined or something. I know all the words. I know them in Spanish too, and I even know a few of them in Latin. But that surprised me about her. But in general, and I'm not a fan of hers at all. But in general, I think that other than the problem that you mentioned here, she might even be appointed. I mean, she might get herself appointed. I mean, a president can pick somebody to be the U.S. attorney. She has a legal background. There's nothing wrong with being a commentator, right, Kim?
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with a lawyer like David Katz being a commentator. It certainly doesn't disqualify. If anything, it qualifies. Every day you're dealing with the legal issues.
Yeah.
And the guy before this, Ed Martin, thank goodness, Senator Adam Schiff really went after that nomination and led the charge of him not being. And you look at the statements that he made about getting people and stuff like that. I don't think that the judge has that kind of a record. So, and I don't have any cases pending. So I'm not saying this to curry favor with her in case she gets the job. I have no cases pending in the District of Columbia. But she might get in the normal way. What do you think, JL? Do you think that he's going to put her up for appointment as the permanent?
I mean, yes, I do, because he likes people that he sees on TV and he knows her personally. So he'll feel very comfortable with her. I feel like Pete Hegseth, what happened in my high school many years ago. I remember UPenn used to always be like my school would send 10, 11 kids to UPenn every year. And then one year, it just all of a sudden was like 2 kids every year. And somebody said, obviously, something had happened or some blow up had happened with a student. Oh, no. But that's my point, is that Pete Hegseth might be the guy who ends the Fox News Trump administration pipeline, where they're like, can you just pick somebody else from at least a different channel, let alone TV? But we can't keep going the Fox News plus happy hour pipeline to the administration.
Yes, something. Okay, guys.
David Katz, we've kept you too long. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next Thursday. David Katz, we love it when you're on the show. Thank you so much.
Great being with you, JL.
Bye.
It was fun.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.